Tanner, a die-hard football fan, arrived at the big game with his close friend Sarah. The energy in the stadium was electric as fans cheered for their favorite teams. Sarah, always up for a thrill, dared Tanner to sneak into the locker room of the winning team and snag a sweaty jersey as proof of his bravery. Feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness, Tanner agreed to the dare. He waited for the right moment and successfully slipped into the locker room, keeping his eyes peeled for any sign of the players. As he rummaged through the room, he heard the sound of a locker door slamming shut. Before he could react, a large, muscular player named Jock from the losing team appeared before him. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Jock growled, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. Tanner's heart raced as he tried to come up with a believable excuse. But before he could speak, Jock noticed the fan gear Tanner was wearing, emblazoned with the logo of the winning team. "You're one of their fans, aren't you?" Jock sneered, his grip tightening on Tanner's arm. "Well, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, buddy." Before Tanner knew what was happening, Jock dragged him over to Rich, the team's quarterback, and the rest of the players. They were all still in their jockstraps, sweaty and angry after their loss. "Look what we found," Jock said, a cruel glint in his eye. "A little fanboy who thinks he can just waltz into our locker room and take what he wants." The other players snickered, sizing Tanner up with a mix of amusement and contempt. Rich stepped forward, his biceps bulging as he crossed his arms. "I think we should teach this little intruder a lesson," he said, his voice low and menacing. "After all, we wouldn't want him to try something like this again." Tanner's stomach dropped as the players closed in around him. He was outnumbered and outmatched, and he knew he was in for the beating of his life. But as the players towered over him, Tanner couldn't help but feel a strange mix of fear and excitement. He knew he was in way over his head, but he couldn't deny the thrill of being so close to these powerful, sweaty athletes. The players began to strip off their jockstraps, revealing their massive, muscular bodies. Tanner's eyes widened as he took in the sight before him. He had never seen so many sexy, sweaty men in one place before. "Let's start with some push-ups," Rich said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "I want to see how strong this little fanboy really is." Tanner nodded, trying to hide his nerves. He got down on the floor and began to pump out push-ups, feeling the sweat drip from the players' bodies onto his back. As he pushed himself harder and harder, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of arousal. "Good job, fanboy," Jock said, patting Tanner on the back. "Now let's see how you do with some squats." Tanner followed Jock's instructions, feeling the players' sweaty hands on his hips as they guided him through the exercise. He couldn't believe what was happening. He was surrounded by a group of hot, muscular football players, and they were all focused on him. As the players continued to put Tanner through his paces, the atmosphere in the locker room grew more and more heated. Tanner's heart raced as he felt the players' hands on his body, their sweaty skin sliding against his own. He couldn't deny the attraction he felt towards these powerful men, and he found himself growing more and more aroused with each passing moment. Finally, the players declared Tanner's workout complete. He was panting and covered in sweat, his body trembling from the exertion. "I think it's time for a little reward," Rich said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Why don't you pick one of us, fanboy, and give us a little show?" Tanner's heart raced as he looked around the room, taking in the sweaty, muscular bodies of the players. He couldn't believe what was happening. He was surrounded by a group of hot, horny athletes, and they all wanted him. Without hesitation, Tanner chose Jock. The big man grinned and stepped forward, his powerful body on full display. Tanner couldn't believe how turned on he was. He had never felt this way before. As Tanner began to touch and tease Jock, the other players closed in around him, their bodies pressing against his. Tanner felt their hard cocks pressing against him, their sweaty skin sliding against his own. He couldn't believe what was happening. He was surrounded by a group of hot, muscular men, and they were all turned on and ready for action. The players took turns touching and pleasuring each other, their bodies slick with sweat and desire. Tanner was in heaven, surrounded by a group of hot, muscular men who were all focused on his every need. As the players reached their climaxes, Tanner couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and amazement. He had never experienced anything like this before. It was a wild, exciting, and unforgettable. Still in a daze as Tanner walked out of the stadium, trying to process what had just happened. He couldn't believe what he had just experienced. He had never felt anything like it before. He was both exhilarated and terrified, his body still tingling from the intense encounter. As he made his way back to Sarah, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. He was excited to tell her what had happened, but he was also embarrassed and ashamed. He wasn't sure how she would react. Would she be angry with him for taking such a risk? Or would she be turned on by the story of his encounter with the football players? When he finally found Sarah, she could tell that something was wrong. What happened in there? She asked, her eyes filled with concern. Tanner took a deep breath and told her everything, about the dare, about sneaking into the locker room, and about what had happened with the players. As he spoke, he watched Sarah's expression carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. To his surprise, Sarah's eyes sparkled with excitement as she listened to his story. "Wow," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "That's amazing. I can't believe you did that." Tanner was relieved. He was glad that Sarah wasn't angry with him. In fact, she seemed to be turned on by the story. "I can't believe you got to touch all those hot, sweaty football players," she said, her voice filled with longing. "I'm so jealous." Tanner was surprised. He had never thought of Sarah as being into guys, let alone football players. But as she spoke, he could see the desire in her eyes. "Do you want to go back to my place and relive the experience?" she asked, her voice low and seductive. Tanner nodded, his body responding to Sarah's suggestion. He couldn't believe what was happening. He had just had the wildest night of his life, and now Sarah wanted to join in on the fun.